Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Exploring the Parasha class with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz and Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
We are going to talk about Parashat Miketz today, and Rabbi Shapiro is going to kick us off. But if people are interested in following along, I've been told that we sometimes don't say the chapter and verse. So I'm going to say chapter and verse. We're starting with chapter 42 of Genesis, verse 22. So if people are listening later on or just want to look in your own Chumash, those are the verses that we'll be looking at, 22 through 24 of chapter 42. And I will kick it over to Rabbi Shapiro.
Hey, Rabbi Schatz.
Yep.
Remember when we tried having class on the roof with the Zoom bot? I was just thinking about that font. Remember when we tried that? That was fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, Susan Nemitz was just in my office, took a suit jacket out of my closet, put it on, and left without explaining herself. So
it's freezing. That's why I'm also in a jacket.
Let's see if we get some clarity on why that happened.
Mm-hmm. Great.
The world is full of mystery and wonder. Hi, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Happy Hanukkah. Rabbi Schatz, you didn't say Happy Hanukkah.
That is true. I did not.
Happy Hanukkah. Do you know what I have, Rabbi Schatz?
A Hanukkah? Oh, good. Okay, we already started late, so I think we need to go.
Hanukkah balloon. I actually have a lot of them. All right. Okay. All right. Fine. I'm in the holiday spirit, at least. Yep. Aren't you?
Yes.
Okay. We are in the middle of the Joseph story. Unfortunately, we are starting after the part where Pharaoh shares his dreams, which means I will not be doing my knockoff Elvis version.
Do you know that we're looking at a PDF that says, why is it important to prevent suicide?
Nope. Shared the wrong thing.
Right.
I mean, that is important.
It is important. It's also Torah, but I just not the Parsha. Okay, very good. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's particularly incongruous with talking about the Elvis song from the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. We'll move into the Parsha. Joseph's in Egypt. He's running the show. Back home, things are not so great, is how I'm going to summarize things leading up to chapter 42. Jacob sees that there's food in Egypt. Little does he know it's because of his beloved son. And he tells everybody else, hey, y'all should get on down there. Benjamin stays back, reading, sort of scanning through chapter 42. 10 of Joseph's brothers, interesting, like they're not even named, right? They're still just Joseph's brothers, go down there. Benjamin was not sent since Jacob is afraid something may befall him. And we know that this is a really big famine, right? This isn't just something that is happening to this family. It's a really extensive famine per Pharaoh's dreams. 7 beautiful years of corn. You got the idea. Joseph was a vizier. It's been a while. I haven't met a vizier in some time. His brothers come and bow before him. And here we start hearing about sort of Joseph's inner process, right? He recognizes them, but acts like a stranger to them, which is just a really interesting way of framing it, right? Vayakirem, right? He recognized them. Vayit naker alehem, but he sort of like withheld himself from them. He made it seem as if he didn't recognize them. And we hear that again in verse 8. And Joseph says, right, and there's so much going on here psychologically. Like it's tough for me to just skip ahead to the verses that we're focusing on. But it's so interesting the pivot that you see in verse 9, right? He remembers the dreams that he had, and he doesn't immediately say, I was right. And he certainly doesn't say, hey guys, so great to see ya. He puts the pressure on, right? He really sort of turns the screws and he says, you are spies, right? He puts them in a position where they're going to sort of have to prove themselves. They go back and forth. We are not spies. Yes, you are. And he sort of gets then in verse 13 to hearing something about where they're coming from. We, your servants, were 12 brothers, right? So Joseph sees here that he's sort of still in the group, interestingly, but one is no more. Joseph not letting things go. You'll be put to the test. You have to bring Benjamin as well, and he keeps them confined. Interesting. I was going to only bring this up in our verses, but I'll say here in verse 17, you hear about this confinement that, of course, mirrors what was happening to Joseph right before he ascends to power. But finally, Joseph brings them out on the third day. If you are honest men, one of you will stay back while the rest of you go. You can bring the food back, but you have to bring back the youngest brother. Like basically, one of them will sort of be held in prison escrow while you go and get the other guy. And at least in the meantime, you have to bring Benjamin. And so here we are, verse 22, 23, 24. That's what we're focusing on this morning. Vayomru ish elachav, and each one of them said to the other, Aval ashemim anachnu. We are guilty, al achinu, for our brother, asher ra'inu tzarat nafsho, that we saw the tsaris, as how I translate tzarat. We saw the trouble of his soul, of his spirit. Behit chaneno elenu velo shamanu. We didn't listen to him as he pleaded with us, or so if you know tachanun from liturgy, right? As he was pleading to us, we didn't hear him. Al ken ba'a elenu hatzara hazot. And sure enough, this tzara, this trouble, has sort of been lingering, and now it's coming back to us. The famous dictum, what goes around comes around. It's not just a Justin Timberlake song. Vaya'an Reuven, it's a JT song. You don't know that song, Rabbi Schatz? What goes around, goes around.
Oh, I'm so glad you just started singing that.
It's Hanukkah. That's my Hanukkah gift to you, Rabbi Schatz. I'll do a whole JT mashup.
No.
Vayan Reuven otam, and Reuben responded to them. Oh, that was verse 21. I'm sorry. I said. No. You're okay. You're okay.
I think it just the numbers look funny, I think.
Yeah, they look funny. I wasn't necessarily going to talk about that verse, but it was interesting. We got some good stuff along the way, and I sang a Justin Timberlake song. So it's all good. Okay, now we're actually on verse 22, right? Vayan Reuven. Yeah, that's actually verse 22. Good. Vayan Reuven otam. Reuven said to them lemor. Great. Halo amarti alechem lemor al techetu vayelet velo shmatem. Reuven said to them, hey guys, I told you so. I said not to commit this sin on the boy. Interesting that noun is being used here. Velo shmatem, and you didn't listen to me. Vegam damo hine nidrash. And now it's a funky phrase, right? Now, behold, his blood is, the translation says, now comes the reckoning for his blood. You know the word drash, right? Which means like seeking out. Behold, now sort of like the blood that was spilled is like seeking, is being sought out. Sort of, again, this idea of this tzara has come upon us. Verse 23, Vehem lo yadu ki shomea Yosef. And they didn't know Joseph was listening, ki hamelitz benotam, because translated here as there was an interpreter between them. So it's just this fascinating idea, right? They're talking to each other, thinking Joseph doesn't understand them. Interesting that the interpreter wouldn't be translating this part, but Joseph is actually listening. And I'll point out sort of the recurrence of the word shomea here, right? You didn't listen to me then. And here Joseph is shomeaing. And of course, right, there's a variety of words for what listening can be. And this idea of shomea, it means like really, really listening. See also Shema Yisrael, like a deep listening. And I'll also point out, because I love doing so, melitz, only time in the Torah it appears no other times, which is just very interesting for a word that means to interpret or to translate is a word that, because it only shows up once, it's actually quite difficult to interpret or translate. Okay, now actually verse 24, I'm going to say 1.5 things, and then Rabbi Schatz is going to take kushiyot. Vayisov me'alehem vayefk. Joseph turned from them and he cried. Vayashav alehem vayidaber alehem. He returned to them and he spoke to them. Vayikach me'itam et Shimon. He took Shimon from them. Vayesar oto le'inehem. And he had him bound before their eyes. I'll point out just an interesting juxtaposition, right? We've been talking about hearing, and now there's a point where he's doing this right before their eyes, that the text makes a point to say this is something that happened right in front of them, Shimon being taken into captivity. And also this idea of vaya asar, of being held captive, is a relatively unusual verb. It doesn't happen all that often, and it was applied directly to Joseph when he was being held captive. And now Susan Nemitz is back, and she's bringing back my suit jacket. Susan, why did you have my suit jacket?
Okay, so we're gonna do some kushiyot.
Wait! I didn't get to say. I was gonna say one more thing.
Oh, well then continue.
Because this is hypothetically about mental health and spiritual growth, which I haven't explicitly referenced. Maybe I'll do that. Or I could sing another Justin Timberlake song.
No, I'm trying to move you along. That was the whole point.
Very good. The idea of how revenge is taken, right? That it seems like even as Joseph is hearing, right? I was trying to help out that Joseph is still lingering with this idea, it seems to me, of right? He's toying with them, he's playing with them, even as he's having this big emotional reaction. We hear about him crying, but still, he's really not letting things go. And that's a theme throughout the Joseph story, but for me, it's just such an interesting juxtaposition, particularly with, he can really hear them, right? We're told that he hears them, this idea of shomea, he hears what they're saying, and yet he's still not ready to let things go. And so I think it is a rich and challenging and important question to think about. When is it time to let things go? How do you really listen? What does it mean to really hear things unfold in front of you? I think there's a lot there. I'll leave it at that.
Great. Okay, so if you'll scroll back up to the verses we're looking at, I will take some kushiyot. All right, Renee, go ahead.
So first of all, I was thinking also about the emotional part, and the emotional part with his weeping. So he is letting himself, letting his emotions come to terms, but we don't really know whether is he weeping out of joy or is he weeping out of sadness? Or both.
Yeah, beautiful. We don't know which emotion he's trying to show, but we see that he's showing emotion. Yeah. Denise.
I'm not sure if this is a kushia exactly, but just kind of thinking about what Rabbi Shapiro was saying, and I think about this storyline a lot, I guess just in my own life, because of, lots of people having said, oh, you should just let that go, you know, when they were clearly not on a path of correcting themselves at all, but it would have been very convenient for them, for me to let it go. Mm-hmm. And it, even the verse that Rabbi Shapiro read in the beginning that he didn't mean to read or whatever, where it says he recognized them, but he didn't say anything. But in Hebrew, it doesn't say but, it says and. It says, and he recognized them, and he didn't acknowledge it or whatever. It's because he saw who they were, and he didn't have any information or evidence that they were going to be different. And okay, maybe when people are hungry or really sad, remembering something in that moment, they have like a pang, but that doesn't mean that they had a lasting change. And even when we learn about tshuva, there's stages of what has to happen to earn forgiveness. You don't just like, oh wow, you cried. Okay, well then everything's okay. Like they have to show that they're not going to do that thing again. So I don't think he was harsh at all. I think he was exactly right and self-protective.
Great. Great, though not a kushia, definitely a matter to consider very strongly, and a very insightful point. So thank you for sharing that, and I think that is a very strong read of what is happening here. So I don't know what Rabbi Shapiro's take on that is based on his mental health angle, but I'm sure he will share momentarily. Elon, and then Joanne, and then Marlise.
So firstly, I want to date myself, because when Rabbi Shapiro said it's a JT song, I was like, that's not a James Taylor song. So
awesome. That is great.
It was definitely, that is my JT reference.
And the better of the JT references, to be fair. So that's okay.
Secondly, it's interesting to me, and I'm curious as to what the rabbis say about this, that in verse 22, they're talking about the implications of what they did as being distress. Now, this may be a translation issue. I don't know. Distress to me is a psychological implication, right? Somebody was distressed. That's psychological. And then yet in 23, when Reuben is talking, he says, now comes the reckoning. And to me, reckoning is not a psychological thing. It could be, but it's more likely an actual occurrence, right? Okay, this is your day of reckoning. You will suffer the punishment for this. Yeah. So I'm curious whether that was done purposely to show that there's both a practical implication and a psychological implication, or not necessarily the case.
Great. I think from the beginning of the Joseph story, we have both of those implications happening all the time, right? The pit, I think itself is actually is both of those types of implication, even though it might not be written out in the Torah as clearly as what you're pointing to here. But I mean, I don't know if it was intentionally put in the Torah that way. Maybe Rabbi Shapiro found commentaries on this that implied both. But I think for sure you are picking up on a trope of this story that we see many times over, and that is coming out very strongly in this particular moment, because it takes us back to the beginning of the story where that first happened. So I think it's a very powerful point. I don't know if I'm going to let Rabbi Shapiro talk at the end. I'll get to everybody else's questions, and then I'll go back to Rabbi Shapiro. But I'm sure he'll have something to say on that point as well. Okay, Joanna, and then Marlise.
There's in these verses a very explicit recognition by the brothers that they had done wrong in the past, and then we get to the verse where Joseph cries. And there's a piece of me that wants to really explore what that crying was about. What precisely seeing his brothers caused him to cry. Yeah. And then you get that very interesting word, vayashov, because in addition to meaning that he physically turned to him, that word is also the root of teshuvah. So you wonder, because Joseph also has what to do teshuvah for.
Yeah.
He was not necessarily so nice to his brothers back in the day. And so I sort of wonder what's happening in that moment on Joseph's part when he's crying. Is there any recognition on his part for what he had done, and that this is a moment of tshuva and reconciliation, to a moment at least of tshuva and reconciliation?
Yeah, beautiful. And it's interesting that they use the word vayisov and then vayashov, right? That there's actually, though they don't both mean turning, they definitely both mean directionally not present, right? One is a physical turning away, and the other one is a return back to something. So you were away and now you're coming back. So it is interesting that it seems like either time was taken or physical movement away was needed, and so that's a very interesting point, and one that I think goes back, also works very nicely with what Elon was pointing out, which is what is the implication here of the different dimensions of what's going on, right? You're bringing in Joseph as a character dealing with those implications as well. But what does it mean that there are kind of different dimensions to what is happening to all of the brothers in this moment of recognition? And how are they all dealing with that understanding in their minds based on the characters that they've played and the things that they have done as those characters? Marlise and or Gary.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
So I just note in reading that verse where Reuben speaks just kind of this tone of, reprimand and blame that just so often comes up in times of stress in families.
Yeah,
that can happen. And I guess I missed in the verses leading up to that how it is that he makes the connection, their predicament with what they did to Joseph.
The wrecking.
Yeah.
Meaning why is he automatically
how it is that they connect
saying
that.
Right, because they don't know it's Joseph, right? Joseph knows it's them. We know Joseph knows it's them, but they don't know it's Joseph. So the fact that here Reuben is and everyone, right? The fact that everyone automatically is seeing, decades later, the fact that things aren't going our way here, that's because of what we did to Joseph, is a very interesting thing. Is that, Marlise, am I picking up what you're putting down?
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if I missed something in the verses, or it's just this is this thing that's been hanging over their heads all this time, and that's what they immediately think of.
Blatant guilt.
Yeah,
for sure.
I don't think you're missing anything, and in fact, I think you're spot on. Is my sense of it too. That the fact that they are here saying, here we go, right? Now it's coming to get us. I think shows exactly what you're saying. That and I think,
but there's no notification that there's this guilt was ever. This is the first time this guilt has happened, except after they thought they killed him, before he was captured into Egypt, but enslaved.
Meaning that we haven't seen that guilt surface before.
Right.
We're just seeing it here.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Rabbi Schatz will tell me I'm wrong when I'm wrong. We know that, but I don't necessarily. I can't recall any moment where we've seen that guilt laid bare. Certainly not in this direct of a way. Right, Rabbi Schatz?
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem, right? I think that's part of the sibling issue that happens throughout this whole story, is that no one's taking blame for anything. And similar to what a few of you have now said, like Joseph isn't blameless, right? Joseph also provoked his siblings in a way in which he does have to do tshuva, and he should be sorry. They shouldn't have thrown him in a pit, but there probably was something before that could have been done that would have allowed the story to go in a different direction. There wouldn't have been as much material for a very good musical, but it could have gone in a different direction, and that is all because of the fact that everybody was kind of dealing with their own stuff and not communicating with one another, which is a big problem with siblings in Genesis in general of not communicating.
Well, but it also goes back, I think, to Denise's question in terms of, great. Like, I have a lot to say. It's good Rabbi Schatz wasn't letting me talk, because we would have only made it through like one or two people. I have a lot to say in response to what folks were saying.
I know my audience well.
Am I the audience?
Well, you're part of the audience, yeah.
Oh. Am I listening to a podcast? What's happening right now? In terms of what motivates the asking for forgiveness, right? They're under duress, right? This isn't like a totally freely volunteered, we've really been thinking this over, and we feel bad about this, right? They're under duress. The flip side to that is under duress is better than nothing, right? It's still better to apologize, right? Thinking about at home with my kids, there are times when it's like, you really need to apologize to your brother. No, right? It's still better to say you're sorry under duress than to not say you're sorry, I think, right? We don't necessarily see what they've learned here. And I think the word that has been surfacing tshuva, which of course is more than just an apology. It's seeing what you've done wrong, figuring out why it happened, and then finding a way not to do it again. And the point, Joanna, I think it was yours in terms of that last verse we were exploring, and of course, yes, like the root of tshuva and vayashov there, yes, it's definitely the same root, because and it is, you can think about tshuva also as like a turning, right? A turning towards something, which is then also interesting. By Sovev. I don't think this is Joseph making tshuva, right? I don't see that. Certainly not happening here. Certainly not happening yet. I think there's plenty of room to explore whether he does at all, at any point in the narrative, really. And we see that, well, whatever. That's later on in the story. But I do think it's an interesting question. I want to layer one more. I cut off Rabbi Schatz. I just want to layer one more piece in, which is that even like similar to if I am walking around feeling guilty about something, and then there's something that happens that might be connected to that guilt is much more likely to surface, right? It's much more likely to pop up. It's also interesting because sometimes when you're feeling guilty, sometimes when I'll speak in I statements, sometimes when I'm feeling guilty, I might try to downplay it. And that's exactly what Reuven does, right? Because yes, it's true. I think the Eitz Chaim Chumash, by the way, just a commentary in here, let's everybody off the hook. Eitz Chaim Chumash, I was like flipping through it earlier, and it's very generous with everyone because it says, on the comment of verse 22, Reuven and warned his brothers shed no blood. Yes, that's true. He did say to his brothers, shed no blood. And he didn't take a stand and say, don't do anything bad to him. In fact, he said, shed no blood, cast him into that pit, which is not exactly brother of the year material here, right? So Reuven's coming in and saying, I told you guys shed no blood. That's true, Reuven. That is part of what you said. You also said some other stuff that wasn't so great. So I just think it's interesting to note sort of the different ways in which, and for us to think about, right, when we feel guilty about something, how does that show up? Do we minimize? Do we take ownership? Do we apologize? Because guilt is a powerful emotion. That's powerful stuff, and it can show up in some really, really interesting ways. Yeah, Denise.
Before Denise, because I just want to say one thing from when you cut me off earlier. The end of verse,
I thought you knew your audience.
I do. The end of verse 24 here is just continuing this cycle, right? It's not like, oh, the brothers get off the hook, because I think, Marlise, I was just looking around just to make sure that we're all on the same page. This is not where Joseph says, hi guys, it's me. That's in next week's Parsha. This is just where Joseph knows that these are his brothers. He's come to understand that. They still don't know that it's him, and he's playing a game. He's trying to get them to do things and hurting them in a lot of ways to kind of teach them a lesson, which those of us who teach know that's not how you teach. You don't teach a lesson getting someone to feel the way that you felt. But the end of this verse here just shows that Joseph is continuing on this game, this hurt that he's doing, because they take Shimon away. So, yeah, they threw Joseph into a pit. Yeah, next week they're going to also take Benjamin, or at least accuse Benjamin. But for now, they're also taking Shimon. He hasn't done anything wrong, but Joseph is trying to teach them a lesson. So when we're talking about this kind of cyclical behavior here in terms of how the brothers are treating one another, it's fine that Joseph has emotion around all of this, but ultimately he's still doing something to hurt his siblings at the very end of that same verse. So no one is blameless here. Everyone is kind of unfortunately playing this very hurtful game until they resolve it all in next week's Parsha. Come back for next week. Okay, Denise.
It's just kind of like interesting almost like if we were reading a book or watching a movie, when Reuven says that, because if they had shed blood, like that would be it, he'd be gone. That's it. But just throwing him into the pit and then he was sold and all those crazy things that happen is why they're here. Right. So like that action planted the seeds for him ending up in that position. So, like sometimes when characters say things and they don't realize the import of what they're saying, it feels like that kind of a moment.
Totally. Yeah. That's a very good point.
I wanted to also trace back to the question Elon was asking about this idea of practical versus psychological. Safari is being weird this morning. It's saying verse 22 is verse 21 and it's like lined up weird. So the end of what it seems like is verse 20, whatever. It's much better now. Oh, there we go. Here, I'll just share. Hold on. What's happening? Let me make sure I share the right thing. Is that the right thing? Very good. Okay. So here, the distress coming upon us, that's actually the end of verse 21, and the reckoning for his blood is the end of verse 22, just for the sake of clarity, if folks are looking on at home to make sure people know what we're talking about. I think, the idea of distress versus reckoning is an interesting one. I mean, in the Hebrew, it's tsara versus damo hine nidrash, right? Either it's this tsuris is coming upon us as opposed to the blood is seeking us out, right? One of which sounds much more aggressive than the other. And it is interesting going back to this idea of what the brothers are saying versus what Reuven is saying. Verse 21, it's like they're each saying it to the other. So we don't, there's sort of like a collective murmur among the brothers who are saying this. And Reuven, the one who, on the one hand, yes, he made sure they wouldn't kill him. On the other hand, the one who had them throw him into a pit is the one who is framing it more aggressively in terms of this reckoning. So is it right? So I think you can slice that a couple of different ways in terms of kind of psychoanalyzing why who is saying what, but certainly an interesting question through the lens of like how do guilt and shame linger? When do they bubble up? What's the guilt that we feel, and how do we navigate that in healthy ways or not? I think there's a lot of interesting pieces there. Yes, Karen, let's get an actual mental health professional to weigh in on this. That's You are muted though, because it's still Zoom, and we have to make sure to say that at least once a class.
I don't think there were any shrinks around during this time.
Definitely not.
Yeah. And so all the reactions are very raw and real. You're going to throw me, watch. I'm going to get back at you. Perfectly reasonable. And it takes a while after you do all this shitty stuff, to realize that to repair a relationship means you got to get through the stony part, and you have to say, I want to relate to a person. I want this thing that sticks out of the way. So you got to get to that point, and how you get to that point is different for a lot of different people. If you don't realize that, if you don't think this relationship is important to me, and there's this stone that is standing a wall between us, and I want to get rid of it. If you don't think that way, it's not going to happen. So they have to get to a point where I'm your brother, you're the da-da-da-da, and that's going to come next week.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll also add to that, yes to all of that. And before there can be repair, there at least needs to be acknowledgement that there was wrongdoing, right? And to Gary's point, we haven't seen that at all yet. So the surfacing of the pain and the recognition that there was harm done is the prerequisite for any kind of healing, right? So on the one hand, right, you might say, guys, what's taking you so long to recognize that there was some really messed up stuff that happened here?
Right.
On the other hand, at least it's getting surfaced here. And interestingly, per Rabbi Schatz, although I think I am more sympathetic to Joseph than Rabbi Schatz is, based on what she's saying. And she's right insofar as at least the brothers here are starting to recognize that they've done some gnarly stuff. I think Rashi said gnarly stuff. I think that's old French. Joseph is not yet recognizing his role in the dynamic at all. At least there's something, right, from the brothers. It's an ownership of some pretty heinous stuff. And, you know, I like to believe that there can be forgiveness for that. I hope, right? Yeah.
Well, once you own up to something, right. It's the beginning.
Right, exactly.
As opposed to blaming the other.
Right. Elon.
So it's not, I agree that they are owning up to what they did, but what's not clear to me in the confusion in the two lines is, are they owning up to what they did because they feel guilty and badly about it and they realize, oh, we did something wrong and they're feeling the distress? Or is it the day of reckoning? Is it the practical implications where we did this, now we're screwed, right? So, you know, I think we would all, the kinder interpretation is they feel badly about it and they have some guilt, but it's not clear to me because of distress versus reckoning that that's actually what the Torah is saying.
Yeah, I think there is ambiguity there, right? For sure. I'm just saying at the very least they're naming it, right? We don't know quite why they're naming it or what's motivating it, but they are naming it.
Well,
it's only as good as it goes, right?
What's motivating it is that they're about to be affected by it. Right. They are motivated to say, I'm sorry, because they know that if they don't say they're sorry or don't, I guess I'm not really saying they're sorry, don't acknowledge that which was going on, something worse could even happen. So
maybe, they're saying this is them like processing it out, right? They've had the exchange with Yosef and now this is sort of like the processing session after they've made the formal ask, because again, they think Joseph can't hear this. It's definitely not an apology, right? They're just like, wait a minute, what's going on here, right? This is them kind of like talking it out, you know? I think that's different, right?
Right. But I guess what I'm saying is that if you're a kid and you know that if you say sorry, you're going to be able to leave the classroom and go play recess, you might have a very quicker way of getting to saying, oh, I recognize what I did, than if the teacher says, you're still going to stay in the classroom for all of recess, but I need you to tell me at some point what you did wrong. That kid might take the 15 minutes or 20 minutes to just sit there and be mad and throw a tantrum, as opposed to knowing that if you get to that place faster, you could get that which you need. Now, that's not what's happening here. The brothers don't know that they're going to get something that I guess they do. They get grain, but they don't know that something good could happen with this acknowledgement. But the flip side, I think, is what they fear, is that if they do not acknowledge it, that in fact, there could be something bad, worse, or what happened before could then happen to them again. That's all I'm saying. Okay, Denise.
So I feel like in the example with the kids, the kid who just says sorry because he wants to go to recess it doesn't mean he actually feels it or understands or cares.
Exactly. Right. Correct.
Right. So there's that part, but also like maybe this is because the brothers are for the first time in a position where someone has power over them. And so then they're recognizing, when we had power over someone, we didn't really use it that well. What if that comes around? And like that word of vayisov, of like, coming back around, spinning, turning, that there might be kind of some reflection starting to happen of, like remember you taught us once that in Midrasha that mercy means when you have power and you don't exert it, and they didn't show mercy when they had power, but now that's what they're asking for.
Right.
Well, they're not asking, they're asking for food. Right? They're not asking for mercy.
Yeah, but no, because even if they don't know who Yosef is, just he's some vizier of Egypt, But like, he needs to have mercy. There's no reason for him to give out food when there is a famine next door that could come to his land or not.
Right.
Who are these jokers? What does he care? It would only come from mercy that he would even give the food.
Right. And I'm gonna make your point further, and then I'm gonna fight with myself. Right? Like he is, in terms of the idea of mercy having power and not exerting it. Once Joseph comes to power, he subjugates everyone. Right? He basically subjugates all of Egypt to stock up on the food. Right? This is not a benevolent leader who comes in. He's not a particularly nice guy as the second in command. And I got a little bit of a softer spot for Joseph here. I really do. I got a softer spot for Joseph. And I think in terms of the brothers too, like, yeah, they screwed up. They totally did. And most of the time when people apologize, it's not motivated out of 100% goodness of their heart because they wake up in the morning and a light bulb went on. It's like, oh man, I really should apologize for that thing from 20 years ago. And there's some comments in the chat, which people, I don't know if folks here have seen it, and people listening definitely can't see, in terms of the hereditary nature of this stuff, right? Paula made a comment about how, the brothers didn't get this out of nothing, right? Like that Yaakov pitted them against each other. And where did Yaakov get that from? Well, from his dad too, right? Like, this is not a healthy family system, folks. There's some pretty rough inherited patterns going on here. And I think that, apparently Rabbi Schatz wrote about it in her Taste of Torah last week, which obviously I voraciously read and just seem to have momentarily forgotten. How could I have? I just want to say one more thing on sort of like what motivates an apology or a change of action. There's sort of sometimes you will hear around like the 12-step community or the recovery community that you can only get sober for yourself, right? You can't do it for anyone else. It just has to be for you. I disagree completely. I don't think that's true at all. I think you have to want to, but if you want to get sober because otherwise your spouse is about to leave you, or because you're tired of being a bad kid or a bad parent or whatever it is, that can be a powerful motivator. And that's okay, right? It's okay to have extrinsic motivation if it causes a real shift in behavior. I think that's okay. And so I'm pushing back a little bit on the why aren't the brothers more automatically sincere in their apology, because I think, people can get pushed towards tshuva for all kinds of reasons. And oh my gosh, 3 different hands went up.
They also don't know that it's him yet, right? So we have to be a little bit more compassionate in terms of the apology, because once they do know that it's him next week, no spoilers, they're going to have a very different reaction. They don't know that it's him yet. So they're internally not even really apologizing, just acknowledging right now. But then once they know that
which
it's
is what
him,
has to surface for the process to unfold.
Right. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. It's about time you did.
Yeah, I know. It takes a while. Okay, Renee.
A year plus later, Rabbi Schatz finally agreed with me about something.
I was going to say,
you sound like the brothers.
He was a little cocky. Joseph was a little cocky from the get-go to begin with, like before all these sorot happened. He was growing up with them before they threw him in the pit. And his responding right now is also a little bit cocky.
I mean, he has the ability to be, right? Because he's in charge. He has power. So he's I know I keep using this term, but he's playing a game, right? He's playing the game of, I'm going to show that I have this power and I'm going to do to you in similar ways what you did to me. And then I'm going to reveal myself to you. But I think that's, if it's coming across as cockiness, I think that might be.
Or he doesn't know any better and he's just doing what he's learned.
Yeah, that's possible.
That too.
Okay, Karen.
I just wanted to say something about doing something for another.
Yeah.
Quitting rehab, all that.
Yeah.
I get that could be part of the bottom. people are leaving you and also so. But I also think that if you don't then switch over to I need to do this for me, then the first time you're pissed off at the person who made you go, you light up. You have your drink. In other words, it becomes this not a good thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree that the people around you will send you someplace, but you got to take ownership of being and living there.
Agreed.
Rebecca.
I'm not quite sure how to actually say what I'm thinking, so it might come out confused. But I think the element of karma here is sort of is confusing for me, I guess, because first of all, on the one hand, they are saying, we're getting punished because of what we've done. On the other hand, why did Joseph get punished? And why does he not get punished for doing what he's doing right now? Because it really is a very cruel thing that he ends up doing. This is just the first step. What he later does with Benjamin is even worse, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like there's supposed to be here a message about karma, but then it's not consistent. And so it's sort of, I guess I'm just confused. I don't know if this is a kushia or a comment about this. Also, it's not clear who is punishing the brothers. If this is sort of just nature's way of getting, what goes around comes around, or if there's somebody punishing.
I think to the point of karma, I think if our Torah, specifically Genesis, had elements of karma written in, it would be an even more messed up story than it is, because there are just so many characters. Starting with Cain and Abel, right? Well, starting with Eve, right? If karma was involved in those, in the repercussions of those stories, we wouldn't get anywhere. So the way that I like to think about Genesis is that less karma and more so, like familial lessons, right? The way that we see different families impacting the way that they create family, whether that's being barren to having children, or sibling rivalry to just general animosity and not being able to find common ground through family, as opposed to just finding differences and separating yourselves like Jacob and Esau, right? There's so much in the story, specifically again in Genesis, that make us think, oh, well, shouldn't this have just happened? And you're right that this part of the story seems to be similar to karma in that it's cyclical, but I think that it's still Joseph trying to teach this lesson to his siblings that is not necessarily trying to hurt them, right? I'll give Rabbi Shapiro that benefit in terms of being kind to Joseph. I don't think that he's trying to do anything to hurt his siblings in a karma type way. I think he's just trying to show them, when you take something away, this is what it feels like. Or when you treat your brother this way, these are now the feelings that I've had that you will now be feeling. I'm not sure that any of that made so much sense, but that's the way that I would categorize the Genesis stories, that you're right. So many of which should have karma elements to them.
Well, I would take out, I would swap out the language of karma, even though interestingly, like we'll hear about how Joseph says, doing a lot of spoiler alerts. I'm sorry for the people who haven't seen Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. We have ruined this show for you, and not just
read the Torah.
Yeah. And I've also ruined it with my singing. But I would, because Joseph later on says, oh, don't worry, all of this happened for a reason, right? So Joseph himself, the character, will have a very strong sense of why all this happened. But what I push back on in terms of the karma piece is it sort of disembodies it, right? Is it takes the actors in the story, I don't mean like the performers, but the people who are taking action in the story, it lets them off the hook, right? Because it's just sort of this, oh, well, karma comes, goes around, comes around, right? Like, no, these are people who are making choices, right? These are people who are making choices, and they might be dysfunctional choices, and they might be choices based on unhealthy relationship patterns that have been laid down now across a couple of generations. But they are people making choices. Who are kind of struggling with, like, what are logical consequences here? Is it possible to rebuild relationships here? What should happen now that my brothers are in front of me and they cast me aside, but now they're here and I have the power? What am I supposed to do? That's a tough question, right? And I don't think it's just about, well, karma comes along and sort of dictates what's happened. I think Joseph is in a challenging spot. I'm not saying he makes the right choice, but I think it's a tough spot to be in, to be confronted with the men who got rid of you are now prostrate in front of you, begging for your help. That's a tough spot to be in. That's a complicated position to be in. And going back to the question that was asked about why does Joseph cry? The normative rabbinic response basically seems to be it's because he heard that they regret what they did, right? Which makes sense, right? That he hasn't heard that, he hasn't known that for all these years, and he finally hears it. Sforno makes a really interesting comment. Sforno says it's because he sees they're upset, which is really interesting. That amidst all of this, that he still just resonates on that basic brotherly level, that when he sees his brothers are upset, he's upset too. And I think that lends a really interesting kind of perspective to this scene in terms of Joseph's experience of it, right? When are the moments that we're so upset that we can't help but cry because the people who we care about are upset? That signifies a really deep level of connection. Really interesting based on pretty much everything we've talked about so far this morning.
Also very interesting that the way in which, and maybe I'll talk about this tomorrow in Beitenu, I don't know, but the way in which he recognizes...
And throw out the hours of preparation you've already put into what you're talking about tomorrow, Rabbi Schatz?
I put no prepreparation into what I'm doing tomorrow yet, but that doesn't mean that it won't be good. I will prepare later. But the fact that Joseph can recognize his brothers so quickly, but the brothers can't recognize Joseph, I wonder if recognition is not so much like, oh, you look that way, but more so like an emotional attachment, right? When there are many people, I may or may not be one of these people, for whom if you cry in front of me, if it's something that I'm connected to for the reason that you are crying, it's very hard for me to not also get emotional. Sometimes there are people who cry in front of me and for whom the reason for their crying is not something that I am emotionally connected to, and so that is different. But when I can put myself into the shoes of the person who is emoting, very often I feel that way as well, especially with my family. If either of my parents cry, I'm a lost cause. I also cry. And same with my siblings. Anytime my siblings did anything, like gave a speech, got up on a stage, blew their nose, anything they did, I was known for cry. I was just so proud of them that I would just cry.
Just like a random stage, like in the middle of a park, or
no, if they were like in a performance.
Oh.
But I do think that's a very different kind of recognition, and interesting that the brothers were so far away from Joseph, not physically, but emotionally so distant from Joseph that they couldn't recognize him. But Joseph immediately, maybe because he was still thinking about them or was still impacted or traumatized or whatever by them, that he could recognize them and therefore had that real empathic moment with and for them.
I could totally deflate that by saying, A, he has now grown up and they were already adults, and B, he probably look all Egyptified and they look basically the same. But it's a lovely sentiment, so I won't deflate it by saying
even if he looked Egyptified, which is not a word.
Now.
If I wear different clothes tomorrow, I'm going to still look the same way today.
Yeah, but he probably got the whole Egyptian haircut and the eye stuff and the...
Okay.
What? That's all of the movies I've seen about the biblical time period are completely accurate, I think.
All right. Do you want to this is your topic, so do you want to Shabbat Shalom us out?
Rabbi Schatz, even if you were to ever...
Who's doing the ribbon?
Rabbi Schatz.
That's what I'm saying.
Rabbi Schatz.
What?
Even if you were to ever cry me a river, JT, don't worry.
Oh, very good.
You've got a friend. Old school JT. Shabbat shalom.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.